Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Accept and the album Eat the Heat. This is an album that I was not familiar with. I mean, I knew it was the album without Udo on it, the one album with David Reece on it. And I honestly knew nothing about this record. I don't think I had ever heard it. I probably maybe casually listened to it on streaming once, but I have knew nothing about this record. So I just saw it in a record store today. The price was right. I grabbed it. I just gave it 2 spins, and here I am to talk about it. Well, it's an interesting record. You can sort of tell. It came out in 1989, and I mentioned that it has David Reece here on vocals, who I think is a great vocalist. He has a really cool voice. Has enough gravel and grit to his voice that it's not in a completely different world than Udo. I mean, nobody really has a voice like Udo. He has such a unique, intense voice. But, maybe David here has a little bit more accessible sounding voice. I mean, I love Udo's voice, but maybe to people who aren't diehard metal fans, they would find David Reece's voice to be a little bit more acceptable. It sounds like the band is trying to move in a more commercial direction. This is 1989, I think I mentioned, and 1989, the whole LA glam melodic radio metal thing it just seems like it's everywhere. So it kind of sounds like they're trying to get in on that party, jump on that bandwagon at times. And when you have an album like this, now I'm a big fan of melodic AOR type rock. In fact, if I'm out somewhere and I see some unknown band that looks like, some keyboards in it, it's that kind of really vocal harmonies, melodic rock, I really like that kind of stuff. I have a real soft spot for that in my metal heart, rock heart. So I actually like that kind of stuff, and they venture into that at times on here. But the problem with something like this is it's called Accept. You can't get out of your mind the earlier stuff. You can't get out of your head Fast as a Shark or London Leather Boys, Metal Heart, all that stuff from the earlier years. So it's hard to accept some of these more melodic radio rock, AOR rock type songs that they throw in on here. If it was a completely different band with a different name, I'd be like, wow, this is fantastic radio rock stuff. I'd be just loving it. But when you're listening to it here in the context, thinking of Accept, it's hard to sort of get past the name. And a lot of bands suffer from that. Bands that started out, then they tried to adapt their sound to what was happening at the time. 1989, this sound was all over the radio, again, with these LA, the glam, hair, melodic, whatever you want to call it, AOR, metal, rock. It was just everywhere. And when you're right in the middle of something like that, it seems like it's never going to go away. And I'm sure they were getting pressure from their record label. The last few albums before this didn't sell as well. And maybe they're getting pressured from the label. Maybe the band feels like, okay, we got to make this move to try to stay relevant. And they sort of go halfway into it, but then there's songs on here that sound like classic Accept. So if they had just gone in one direction, maybe you could just clear your head and say, okay, this is a melodic rock record. But the fact that there's some things on here that harken back to maybe classic Accept, it just sort of reminds you that, oh yeah, this is Accept, and this is the Accept sound that I want to hear. The album features Wolf Hoffman on guitar, and Wolf plays all the guitars on here, even though I forgot to write his name down here. Jim Stacy is also listed on the album, but Wolf is credited with all the guitars on here. Peter Baltes on bass and Stefan Kaufman on drums. Words and music by Accept and Deffy. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. That's Wolf's wife, who throughout the band managed the band, helped them with some of their concepts and some of the music and the lyric writing and stuff like that. Dieter Dierks, produced by Dieter Dierks. I think the production on it is great. It's punchy, it's warm. You may say it's a little too slick, it's a little too, I can't help but thinking about a lot of these late 80s metal bands a little too White Snake or something. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it does take the edge off of the guitars and everything. It does make it a little bit bombastic, like a Bon Jovi record or something at times. So, you know, again, it takes away from that classic Accept feel. But just from a purely sonic standpoint, you know, it's very well produced. It has a really big rock sound to it, which was appropriate for this, you know, for this era. This is what the sound that a lot of bands were going for at this time. So again, the record is a little schizophrenic. You know, you have, starts off really strong with the song Ecstasy. Cool guitar solo intro thing. I've always loved Wolf Hoffman's playing. I did a video on Balls to the Wall. I'll link that in the description down below. Then a classic style Accept riff kicks in. It's got the Accept background vocals that we know and love, the big gang vocals that we're used to hearing from them. So it starts off like, it sounds like it's going to be classic Accept. And again, David Reece, I think, sounds really cool on it. I think he has a great voice, lot of range, but yet he still has some grit and dirt on his sound to give it a little bit of aggression. But then it slips into the melodic AOR rock songs for the next 2 or 3 songs. And again, I like that kind of stuff. And taken out of context, if you just sort of pretend like it's not Accept, they're good songs. It's just, again, as an Accept song on an Accept album, following the opening track, which again sort of feels like classic Accept, it's a little hard to take some of these songs. For instance, Prisoner, Love Sensation, a very Scorpions-like song title, Chain Reaction. I mean, these are all things that kind of sound like this sort of heavy glam, LA rock, all the stuff that was coming out around that time, what a lot of bands were going for. And I mean, it's cool, they're well-written songs, but again, you know, stand for what you are. Now, this is a straight-up radio rock, melodic rock tune. Sounds like something that could have been done by Night Ranger or some other, you know, some random Sunset Strip band that had, you know, who's one of those, Desmond Child writing, you know, helping write. You know, when this era, the late 80s, you saw all these bands and they'd write a song and there'd be all these extra songwriters on it. Desmond Child, all these other famous writers. This sounds like one of those songs, and I gotta give Accept credit. All these songs are written by them. If I didn't know any better, I would have guessed that maybe they brought in some outside writers to give it this sort of AOR flair to it. But this one I actually like, because again, I got a soft spot for this sort of melodic stuff. It's catchy, it's fun. And out of this set of songs, it's probably my favorite. The album side 1 ends with another classic sounding Accept. So we start and end side 1 with great classic Accept here with a D Train. It's a fast ripper, old school driving, really cool dual leads from Wolf, where he's sort of one guitar on another speaker, then the plays, the other speaker plays, and then they play together. Super cool. Side 2, Generation Clash. This one I really like, and it's different for Accept. It has a different feel. It almost has like this robotic, industrial, you know, moving, kind of mid-tempo, moving along. The bass plays by itself a lot in the verse. There's this low-pitched, like robot-like sounding voice repeating the chorus of the song, which I think is really catchy. It has a little bit of a groove to it, and I really like this one. And it's almost like I wish, okay, if you were going to go in a different direction, I would have rather have seen them experiment more like this. This is different for Accept, but it's still heavy, it's still kind of cool, whereas the other songs sound like they're just trying to cash in and trying to get a song on the radio. Let's see, Turn the Wheel, more 80s, Sunset Strip, hard rock, Hellhammer, cool heavy name, kind of comes off like heavy melodic Wasp maybe. David Reece's voice at times reminds me of Blackie Lawless, so maybe that's what I'm hearing here. But again, that kind of like, you know, that kind of sound that you might have heard from like a 3.5 minute, you know, Wasp song that they might have had a video for. Now, then the album ends with my favorite song on the record, probably my favorite song on the record, Mistreated. It's a dark, brooding ballad. It's got this really nice picked guitar intro. You know, Mistreated was a Deep Purple song, the David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes era, so maybe that's where I'm also hearing this almost David Coverdale style vocal delivery in the intro, where Reece is a little bit lower in his vocal range. Lots of big hanging chords at times with nice melodic lines from Wolf Over the Top. Reminds me of like a Scorpions ballad, and it's just a really, really cool melodic ballad, slightly dark and brooding song that has a long fade out to take the record out. So when I put it together, first song, XTC, D-Train, Generation Clash, Mistreated, Hellhammer, I really like those. And those sound like Accept. The other stuff, again, I like some of the melodic rock stuff, but it's a little too much for me on some of them, like Prisoner and Love Sensation, Chain Reaction. Stand for What You Are is kind of fun. Turn the Wheel, I guess, is kind of fun. But again, it's just a little bit too much in that direction. And with the other songs on here that just remind you of like, oh man, this is like D-Train, that fast classic Accept sound that we love. It just makes you wish that they would have done more of that. So I think it was a failed experiment. The band, David Reece, only lasted for one album with the band, and it was interesting. An album that I've heard about, I've heard other people talk about. It usually doesn't rank very high on people's lists when they're ranking Accept albums. Saw it today, had to get it, gave it 2 spins, and jumped right on here and gave you my thoughts on it. All right, so what are your thoughts on this album, Accept, Eat the Heat? Let me know what you guys think of it. What do you think of these more melodic songs on here? What do you think of David Reece's voice in the band? How does it work? Let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.